You think you can walk out of here without paying and nobody will notice? Turn around and put your hands where I can see them. On what should have been an ordinary grocery store visit, an arrogant police officer decided to publicly accuse and arrest a calm black woman for shoplifting, never realizing that the quiet woman he was humiliating was actually the police captain who outranked him and would soon expose his behavior in front of everyone watching. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The early evening air around the Greenfield Market Shopping Plaza carried the quiet rhythm of people finishing their errands before heading home for dinner. Shopping carts rolled across the pavement outside the grocery store entrance while the soft hum of traffic passed through the parking lot beyond the rows of parked cars. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights reflected across the polished tile floors as customers moved through the aisles with baskets and carts. Captain Vanessa Cole walked slowly along the produce section in simple casual clothing, a small shopping basket resting comfortably in the crook of her arm. She had spent most of the afternoon inside the precinct reviewing reports and meeting with department supervisors, and a stop at the grocery store was meant to be nothing more than a quick errand before heading home. To anyone who passed her in the aisle, she looked like any other shopper scanning labels and selecting a few items for the evening. Her posture was relaxed, her movements unhurried, but the quiet awareness in her eyes revealed something else. Vanessa had spent years in law enforcement learning how to observe the smallest changes in people and environments. A raised voice across the store, a suspicious glance between employees, a manager nervously watching a customer from behind a shelf. Those details rarely escaped her attention. Near the front of the store, the sliding doors opened again as two uniformed officers stepped inside. Officer Ryan Mercer moved first, his posture confident as he scanned the interior of the store. Behind him followed Officer Luke Ramirez, who looked far less certain about why they had been called there. The store manager, David Klein, hurried toward them immediately, wiping his hands nervously against his apron. "Officer," he said, quickly, pointing across the store, "I think that woman over there might be trying to walk out with merchandise." Mercer's eyes followed the direction of Klein's finger and settled directly on Vanessa, standing calmly near the checkout lanes with her basket. He did not ask any additional questions. He did not verify the situation. Instead, he began walking toward her with the determined stride of someone who believed he had already solved the problem. Vanessa noticed the approaching officers immediately. She set one item gently into her basket and turned to face them calmly. Officer Mercer stopped directly in front of her, his expression already hardened with accusation before a single word had been spoken. What he did not realize was that the woman he had just decided to arrest had already seen officers like him many times before. Officer Ryan Mercer stopped only inches from Vanessa Cole, his shadow falling across the checkout lane as several customers nearby slowed their movements to watch what was unfolding. The small shopping basket still rested in Vanessa's arm, filled with a few ordinary groceries she had not yet even paid for. Mercer pointed directly at the basket with open accusation. "Set that down," he ordered sharply. Vanessa did not react with alarm. She simply placed the basket gently on the counter beside the register and looked at him with calm attention. "Is there a problem, officer?" Mercer's voice grew louder immediately, clearly enjoying the attention gathering around them. "You know exactly what the problem is." Several shoppers in line began whispering while the cashier froze behind the register, uncertain whether to continue scanning items or stop entirely. Officer Luke Ramirez approached more slowly behind Mercer, already looking uncomfortable with the tone of the confrontation. Mercer stepped closer to Vanessa and gestured toward the store exit. "The manager says you were trying to walk out with merchandise." Vanessa glanced briefly toward the manager, David Klein, who stood several yards away watching nervously. "I have not even reached the register yet," she said calmly. Mercer crossed his arms. "That is not what I asked." Vanessa kept her voice steady. "I was about to pay." Mercer shook his head as if the explanation annoyed him. "People always say that after they get caught." Ramirez stepped slightly closer to Mercer. "Ryan, maybe we should verify." Mercer cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I already verified it." His attention returned to Vanessa. "Let me see your identification." Vanessa reached into her purse slowly and removed her driver's license, handing it to him without hesitation. Mercer glanced at the card briefly before handing it back. The name clearly meant nothing to him. "Turn around," he ordered. The sudden command caused several customers nearby to gasp quietly. Vanessa raised an eyebrow slightly. "Excuse me." Mercer pointed toward the store in trance again, his voice rising even louder. "You are under investigation for shoplifting." Vanessa did not move. "I have not left the store." Mercer stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping the same aggressive tone. "You can explain that downtown." He grabbed her arm suddenly and pulled it behind her back, the movement drawing the attention of nearly everyone near the front of the store. Ramirez stepped forward immediately. "Ryan, wait." Mercer ignored him completely. The metallic sound of handcuffs sliding from his belt echoed across the checkout lanes as he raised them into view. Vanessa remained perfectly still, her posture calm even as the steel cuff closed around one of her wrists with a sharp click. The moment froze the entire line of customers watching. And standing there in front of them all, Officer Ryan Mercer was completely unaware that the woman he had just placed in handcuffs was not the powerless civilian he believed her to be. Officer Ryan Mercer tightened his grip on Vanessa Cole's arm as the first cuff locked around her wrist with a sharp metallic click. The sound cut through the quiet hum of the grocery store like a warning bell. Several customers near the checkout lanes froze in place, their carts half loaded with groceries as they stared at the scene unfolding in front of them. Vanessa remained calm, her expression steady even as the cold steel rested against her wrist. Officer Luke Ramirez shifted nervously beside Mercer. "Ryan," he said quietly, "we should slow down." Mercer ignored him completely. Instead, he pulled Vanessa's other arm behind her back, forcing her slightly forward toward the checkout counter. "You want to play games?" he said loudly enough for the surrounding customers to hear. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Vanessa kept her voice even. "I am not resisting." Mercer scoffed and snapped the second cuff closed around her wrist. The metal clink echoed against the tile floor. "That is what they all say," he muttered. A woman standing 2 registers away lifted her phone and began recording. A man near the produce aisle leaned around the display shelves to watch. The entire front section of the store had gone quiet. Vanessa's groceries remained sitting in the small basket beside the register. She glanced briefly at the cashier, who looked completely stunned. Then she turned her attention back to Mercer. "Officer," she said calmly, "you are making a serious mistake." Mercer laughed under his breath. "You think that line is new to me?" He began guiding her toward the store entrance. The automatic doors slid open as the flashing lights of the patrol cruiser outside reflected faintly through the glass. Ramirez followed behind them, clearly uncomfortable now. "Ryan," he said again, lowering his voice. "She has not left the store with anything." Mercer stopped just inside the doorway and turned sharply toward him. "You want to take responsibility for this?" Ramirez hesitated but did not answer. Mercer shook his head and returned his focus to Vanessa. "People like you always think you are smarter than everyone else," he said. Vanessa did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked calmly across the store where the manager still stood watching nervously. Several more phones were now raised among the customers. The quiet tension inside the building had become impossible to ignore. Mercer tugged on the cuffs again. "Let's go," he said. Vanessa remained composed as she stepped forward with him toward the parking lot. Even as the steel cuffs rested around her wrists, there was no panic in her voice when she spoke again. "Officer Mercer," she said quietly, "you still have time to stop?" Mercer smirked as he pushed the door open and led her outside into the fading evening light, completely convinced the situation remained under his control. Officer Ryan Mercer pushed the grocery store door open and guided Vanessa Cole out into the fading evening light of the parking lot. The patrol cruiser sat directly in front of the entrance with its emergency lights flashing across the rows of parked cars. The sudden brightness made the steel cuffs around Vanessa's wrists glint sharply as Mercer pulled her toward the front of the vehicle. The sliding doors behind them opened again as several curious customers stepped outside, their voices low as they whispered and watched the scene unfold. One young man stood near the cart, return holding his phone openly, recording everything. Officer Luke Ramirez followed a few steps behind Mercer, clearly uneasy now that the situation had moved into full public view. "Ryan," he said quietly, "we should slow down." Mercer ignored him. Instead, he steered Vanessa toward the hood of the cruiser and pressed her hands down against the metal surface. "Stay right there," he ordered. Vanessa complied without resistance. The patrol lights cast alternating red and blue reflections across the glass storefront and the asphalt beneath their feet. Mercer walked around to the driver's side of the cruiser and reached inside for his radio. "Dispatch," he said into the microphone. "Suspect detained for shoplifting at Greenfield Market." Vanessa lifted her head slightly. "I have not stolen anything." Mercer turned toward her with a thin smile. "You can explain that downtown." Ramirez stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "Ryan, the manager never said she left the store." Mercer shook his head. "The manager said she was suspicious." He leaned against the cruiser door as if the argument were already settled. Vanessa watched him calmly. "Officer Mercer," she said quietly, "this situation can still be resolved right now." Mercer laughed under his breath. "You really do not understand how this works." A small group of customers had gathered near the entrance now, their phones raised as the confrontation continued. The store manager, David Klein, stood nervously in the doorway, wringing his hands as he watched. Vanessa's voice remained calm. "You should check my wallet." Mercer rolled his eyes. "For what?" Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Identification." Mercer crossed his arms. "You already gave me your license." Vanessa held his gaze steadily. "Not that identification." Ramirez glanced at Mercer with a puzzled expression. "Maybe we should just look," he suggested. Mercer sighed dramatically and stepped forward again, clearly irritated. "Fine," he said. "Let us see what you think is so important." He reached into Vanessa's purse and pulled out her wallet, flipping it open with careless impatience. The parking lot grew quiet as the neighbors and customers continued watching. Mercer's eyes moved across the cards inside. For a moment, he did not react. Then his expression shifted slightly as he read the bold lettering printed on the badge clipped to the inside pocket. The confidence in his posture faltered just enough for Ramirez to notice. "Officer." Ryan Mercer stared down at the open wall in his hand, the flashing patrol lights reflecting off the polished badge inside it. For a moment, the parking lot seemed to hold its breath. The customers gathered near the grocery store entrance watched silently, their phones still raised. Mercer's eyes moved slowly across the metal shield and the printed identification card beneath it. The bold lettering was unmistakable. "Captain, Police Department." His fingers tightened slightly around the wallet as if the object had suddenly become heavier than it had been seconds before. Officer Luke Ramirez stepped closer and glanced at the badge over Mercer's shoulder. His eyes widened immediately. "Ryan," he said quietly. Mercer did not respond. Vanessa Cole remained standing calmly against the cruiser hood, the steel cuffs still resting around her wrists. She watched him with the same steady composure she had carried from the beginning. Mercer finally lifted his eyes toward her. The confidence that had fueled his actions only moments earlier had vanished completely. "You," he began, but the words stalled in his throat. Vanessa spoke evenly. "Yes." The quiet answer carried far more weight than any raised voice could have. Around them, the small crowd of customers leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift in the situation. The young man near the cart return adjusted his phone to capture the moment more clearly. Mercer looked down at the badge again, as if hoping he had misread it. But the name printed beneath the insignia remained the same. "Captain Vanessa Cole." Ramirez stepped back slowly, his expression a mixture of shock and realization. "She is your commanding officer," he said under his breath. Mercer's shoulders stiffened. His breathing slowed as the truth settled in piece by piece. The woman he had accused, grabbed, and placed in handcuffs in front of half the store was not a shoplifter. She was his captain. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "You should remove the cuffs now, Officer Mercer." The words were calm, almost gentle, yet they carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent years giving orders. Mercer stood frozen for a moment longer. Then his hands moved quickly to the cuffs. The metal clicked open with a sharp sound as he stepped back, lowering his gaze to the pavement. Vanessa rubbed her wrists lightly before taking the wallet from his hand and closing it. The neighbors and customers continued watching. Quietly, the humiliation of the moment hung in the air, heavier than the flashing lights or the murmuring voices around them. And standing there in the parking lot beneath the fading evening sky, Officer Ryan Mercer finally understood that the arrest he thought would prove his authority had instead revealed exactly how recklessly he had abused it. Officer Ryan Mercer stood frozen for several seconds after removing the handcuffs from Vanessa Cole's wrists, the reality of what had just happened settling over him like a heavy weight. The flashing patrol lights continued to wash the parking lot in slow pulses of red and blue, while the small crowd of customers remained gathered near the store entrance. Several of them were still recording with their phones, capturing every moment of the aftermath. Vanessa calmly closed her wallet and slipped it back in her purse before placing both hands lightly on the hood of the cruiser again. The simple gesture made Mercer look up sharply. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice had lost the earlier arrogance that had fueled the confrontation. Vanessa's tone remained composed. "Waiting." Mercer blinked. "For what?" Vanessa looked at him steadily. "For you to decide how you want this moment to end." Officer Luke Ramirez shifted uneasily beside the cruiser, glancing between them. The weight of the situation had become impossible to ignore now. Mercer rubbed his hand across the back of his neck, clearly struggling to regain control of the encounter. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "Maybe we both got a little carried away." Vanessa did not respond immediately. She simply watched him with the same quiet patience she had carried throughout the entire confrontation. Mercer took a step closer and gestured toward the patrol car. "You do not have to make a big deal out of this," he said. "We could just move on." Ramirez frowned slightly at the suggestion, but remained silent. Vanessa finally spoke again. "Officer Mercer," she said evenly, "I gave you multiple opportunities to slow down before this escalated." Mercer forced a nervous laugh. "And I'm fixing it now." Vanessa shook her head slightly. "No." The word was quiet but final. Mercer's expression tightened again. "You already have the cuffs off," he said. Vanessa met his gaze. "Yes, but what happens next will determine whether you have a career tomorrow." The words hung in the air like a warning. Mercer glanced briefly toward the customers still filming. Pride flickered in his expression again. "You think you can ruin someone over a misunderstanding?" he muttered. Vanessa's voice remained calm. "It stopped being a misunderstanding when you ignored the chain of command." Mercer scoffed quietly, though the confidence behind the sound felt forced now. "Nobody needs to hear about this." Vanessa's eyes did not leave his. "Dispatch already has." The statement landed like a sudden crack of thunder in the quiet parking lot. Mercer's head snapped toward the patrol cruiser radio mounted inside the open door. In that moment, he realized something he had not considered earlier. The situation had moved beyond anything he could quietly walk away from, and the final chance to undo what he had started had already slipped past him. The quiet parking lot of Greenfield Market felt suddenly heavier after Vanessa Cole's final words about dispatch. Officer Ryan Mercer stood beside the patrol cruiser, staring toward the open driver's side door, where the radio sat mounted on the dashboard. The flashing emergency lights continued reflecting across the asphalt and glass storefront behind him, but the confidence that had carried him through the entire confrontation was gone. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then the patrol radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, confirm situation status," the dispatcher's voice said through the speaker. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Mercer swallowed hard. Officer Luke Ramirez looked from the radio to Vanessa and back again, his expression tightening. Mercer slowly reached for the radio, but stopped halfway, as if he already knew whatever he said would not change what had happened. Vanessa watched him calmly, her posture straight and composed. The neighbors and customers near the entrance leaned closer, their phones still recording every detail. "Officer Mercer," Vanessa said quietly, "you might want to answer that." Mercer's hand trembled slightly as he finally lifted the microphone. "Unit 23, he said, though the confidence in his voice had vanished. Before he could say anything else, the dispatcher spoke again. Captain Cole, command is requesting your report. The words landed in the parking lot with unmistakable clarity. Mercer's face drained of color. His eyes moved slowly toward Vanessa as the realization struck him fully for the first time. She stepped forward calmly and took the microphone from his hand. "This is Captain Vanessa Cole," she said evenly. "Situation under control." The crowd outside the store murmured quietly as the title echoed through the speaker. Mercer stared at her in disbelief. The calm woman he had shoved against the cruiser, the woman he had handcuffed and accused in front of an entire store, was not simply another shopper. She was the captain who commanded his precinct. Vanessa handed the radio back to him before reaching into her purse again. She removed the badge from her wallet and held it up once more under the flashing patrol lights. The polished metal shield reflected the red and blue glow as she met his eyes. "You should have checked it earlier," she said softly. Mercer did not answer. He could not. His shoulders sagged slightly as the weight of the moment collapsed around him. Officer Ramirez stepped back instinctively, already understanding the consequences that would follow. The customers near the entrance whispered among themselves as the truth spread through the crowd. And standing there beneath the flashing lights of his own patrol car, Officer Ryan Mercer realized that the arrest he thought would prove his authority had just exposed the exact moment his career began to fall apart. The flashing lights from the patrol cruiser continued to wash the Greenfield Market parking lot in waves of red and blue as the truth of the moment settled over everyone watching. Officer Ryan Mercer remained standing beside the cruiser, his hand still loosely gripping the radio microphone Vanessa Cole had just returned to him. His shoulders were stiff, his expression hollow, and the arrogance that had filled his voice minutes earlier had vanished completely. The quiet murmur from the small crowd gathered near the store entrance grew louder as people realized what had just happened. "She is the captain," someone whispered. Officer Luke Ramirez stepped away from the cruiser slowly, his eyes moving between Mercer and Vanessa with the careful caution of someone who knew the situation had crossed a line that could not be erased. Vanessa remained calm, her posture straight as she clipped her badge back in her wallet and placed it inside her purse. The steel cuffs Mercer had removed earlier still rested on the hood of the cruiser, reflecting the flashing lights like a reminder of the moment he had chosen to escalate the situation. The patrol radio crackled again. "Unit 23, command is requesting immediate clarification," the dispatcher said. Mercer's hand tightened slightly around the microphone, but he did not respond. He could not. Vanessa spoke calmly instead. "Captain Cole here. I will handle the report directly with command." The dispatcher paused for a brief moment before answering. "Copy that, Captain." The title echoed across the parking lot once more. Mercer finally lowered his gaze to the pavement. The humiliation was no longer subtle. Customers who had stepped outside to watch began whispering openly now, and several phones were still pointed toward the cruiser. Vanessa took a slow step forward and looked directly at Mercer. Her voice remained composed, but carried unmistakable authority. "Officer Mercer, you will return to the precinct immediately and await further instruction." The words were not loud, but they landed with the weight of a command that could not be ignored. Mercer nodded faintly, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Captain." The neighbors and customers watching fell silent again as the reality of the moment settled into place. The officer who had dragged her out of the store in handcuffs minutes earlier now stood quietly taking orders from the same woman. Vanessa turned away from the cruiser and glanced briefly toward the grocery store entrance where the manager and customers still stood watching. The tension in the air slowly began to fade as the flashing lights reflected across the quiet parking lot. Justice had not arrived through shouting or force. It had arrived through the simple revelation of truth. The flashing lights of the patrol cruiser finally faded as Officer Ryan Mercer climbed slowly into the driver's seat and pulled away from the Greenfield Market parking lot under the quiet direction of dispatch. The small crowd gathered near the entrance watched the vehicle disappear down the street before the tension that had filled the evening air began to dissolve. Captain Vanessa Cole remained standing beside the entrance of the store for a moment longer, the calm composure she had carried throughout the entire confrontation still evident in her posture. Officer Luke Ramirez lingered beside the cruiser that remained parked for the moment, clearly processing the events that had just unfolded. He approached Vanessa carefully, his voice respectful now. "Captain, I am sorry for how that was handled." Vanessa gave a small nod. "You spoke up when it mattered," she replied quietly. Ramirez nodded once and stepped away, already aware that the next conversation waiting for him would take place back at the precinct. The store manager, David Klein, finally walked out of the entrance with visible relief on his face. "Captain Cole, I had no idea," he said nervously. Vanessa smiled faintly. "You acted on what you believed was correct information. That is your job." Around them, the customers who had stepped outside slowly returned to their shopping carts and conversations. The quiet rhythm of evening errands returned to the parking lot, as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a brief disturbance in the ordinary flow of the day. Vanessa bent slightly and picked up the small basket of groceries she had left beside the register earlier. The simple act felt almost symbolic, a quiet return to normalcy after the tension that had just unfolded. As she walked back inside the store, a few customers gave her respectful nods of acknowledgement. One woman quietly said, "Thank you for handling that the way you did." Vanessa simply smiled and continued toward the checkout lane. The fluorescent lights inside the store hummed softly as the cashier scanned the items in her basket. Outside, the street lights flickered on as evening settled over the neighborhood. Within minutes, the parking lot looked exactly as it had before the patrol car arrived. Vanessa stepped outside with her bag and walked calmly toward her car. The entire encounter had lasted less than 20 minutes. Yet it had revealed more about authority and responsibility than most people ever witnessed in a lifetime. As her car pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared down the road, the quiet lesson of the evening remained behind. Real leadership does not need to shout or threaten. It simply stands firm until the truth makes itself impossible to ignore. When you reflect on the moment that unfolded in that grocery store parking lot, the most powerful detail is not the badge itself, but the contrast between two very different understandings of authority. Officer Mercer believed authority meant the freedom to act first and think later, convinced that a louder voice and a pair of handcuffs would settle any situation. Captain Cole, on the other hand, carried authority in a completely different way. She did not rush to prove who she was. She allowed the officer's own decisions to reveal exactly what kind of leadership he had been practicing. What makes this story meaningful is that the turning point did not come from anger or retaliation. It came from composure. Captain Cole understood that the most effective way to expose arrogance is often to let it unfold in full view. In the end, Mercer was not defeated by force. He was defeated by the simple truth that real authority carries responsibility with it. When that responsibility disappears, the badge itself becomes nothing more than metal. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.